The white porcelain cup crossed the room in a perfect arc and exploded against the wall less than 30 centimeters from Donna Teresa's face. There was no apology. There wasn't even the slightest sign of remorse. Just Bianca, 16 years old, looking at the shards scattered across the marble with the same indifference as someone tossing a crumpled piece of paper into the trash. I said no sugar. Was that so hard? Donna Teresa was 54 years old, had 3 children at home waiting for her, and 22 years of experience as a housemaid. Never, in all that lifetime of work, had anyone thrown something toward her face. She lowered her head slowly, went to the back room, grabbed her bag without folding a single piece, and walked out through the service door without saying a single word. She was the 12th maid in less than 10 months. The Cavalcante mansion was located in a gated community on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by impeccable gardens that 2 gardeners maintained every day of the week. The house had 8 bedrooms, 4 living rooms, a heated pool, and a wine cellar that Mr. Renato Cavalcante rarely opened. On the outside, it was the exact picture of what many people call a dream. On the inside, it was a place where silence weighed differently depending on who was in the hallway. Renato Cavalcante built his fortune importing industrial equipment. He worked for 20 years without vacations, without weekends, without proper sleep. When he finally reached the point where he no longer had to worry about money, he realized he had lost the habit of being present at home. His wife, Fernanda, was kind, polite, and completely incapable of saying no to her own daughter. Not out of weakness of character, but because at some point in the past she had confused love with the absence of limits. And when she realized the damage, Bianca was already 12 years old, and the pattern was set. Bianca grew up understanding the world from a single angle, hers. She wasn't cruel for fun. She was cruel out of habit, because she had never encountered real resistance. Every time she yelled, someone backed down. Every time she insulted, someone apologized. Every time she threatened, something changed around her. And this cycle kept repeating until she simply stopped imagining that things could work any other way. For Bianca, the world was malleable and people were temporary obstacles that would give in at the right moment. The employment agencies in the city already knew the Cavalcante address. Some refused to send candidates. One of them had an internal note in the system that simply said, "Wait for confirmation before accepting request." Another had referred 7 different people in 3 months and stopped answering the family's calls. Fernanda started hiring by recommendation, then out of desperation, then by any means that still worked. She knew what was happening. Renato knew too. The 2 spoke about it in low voices, on the veranda, after Bianca went to sleep, as if the problem were smaller than it was, as if it would go away on its own over time. It didn't. On the morning after Donna Teresa left, Fernanda was sitting in the kitchen with her laptop open and her phone in hand when she received a message from a distant cousin. There was a woman available for domestic work. She didn't have long references, but she had a strange reputation that no one could quite explain. It was said that she never left a job on her own. It was always the employer who ended the contract, and always for reasons no one could properly articulate. One former employer said only, "She changes people without them realizing it." Another refused to comment. Her name was Clarice. Fernanda looked at the empty kitchen, at the dishes piled in the sink, at the coffee that had gone cold because no one had gone to get it, and dialed the number. Clarice answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, direct, without the usual anxiety of someone who really needs the job. They scheduled an interview for the afternoon of the following day. When Fernanda hung up, she stared at the phone for a long moment, unable to name exactly what she had felt during those 3 minutes of conversation. It wasn't relief. It was something like an uneasy curiosity, the kind that settles in your chest without asking permission, that you try to ignore and can't. In the bedroom on the second floor, Bianca was lying on her back, headphones on at full volume, eyes closed, completely unaware of what had just been said in motion downstairs, just a few meters away from her. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us in the comments what you think and which city or country you're watching from. Clarice arrived at the scheduled time, not a minute early, not a minute late. Fernanda received her in the living room and stood there for a few seconds without knowing what to say, because Clarice was not what she had imagined. She was in her early 40s, hair pinned back with a simple clip, wearing clean clothes with no pretension. What stood out was not her appearance, but the way she stood still, without restlessness, without that anxious look of someone being evaluated. It was as if she were the only person in that room who didn't need to prove anything. The interview lasted 40 minutes. Clarice asked questions Fernanda did not expect. What the household schedule was, who decided the menu, what weekends were like. When Fernanda mentioned Bianca, she chose her words carefully, as she always did. She said her daughter was a bit intense and had had some adjustment issues with the previous ones. Clarice listened without interrupting, without showing surprise, without offering any easy reassurance. "And you still accept?" Fernanda asked at the end, unable to hide her strangeness. "I accept," said Clarice. Just like that. She started the following Monday. Bianca came down the stairs at 10 in the morning with wet hair, shorts, and an expression that was already a statement of intent. She stopped in the hallway when she saw a woman she didn't recognize organizing the cleaning closet with a calmness that seemed deliberate. "Who are you?" Clarice closed the closet door before answering. "I'm Clarice. I started today." "Another one," Bianca murmured and walked to the kitchen. Breakfast was ready, the table set, the fruit cut the way she liked it, without anyone having asked how she liked it. Bianca looked at it for a moment, then picked up her phone and completely ignored it. But something registered. The first 3 days were of mutual observation, although only one of them knew it. Bianca tested the limits she knew. She left clothes on the floor waiting for a complaint, didn't show up for meals at the agreed time, answered in monosyllables when spoken to. Clarice did not complain about the clothes, did not wait for Bianca at the table, did not try to start conversation, but she also did not give in on what was hers. On Thursday, Bianca walked into the kitchen at 11 at night, wanting a snack that wasn't simple. She listed 7 ingredients in the tone of someone placing an order in a restaurant. Clarice was washing the dinner dishes, which had been delayed because of an arrangement Bianca had deliberately undone earlier. "I can make a sandwich now. The rest can wait until tomorrow." Bianca let out a short laugh. "Do you know who my father is?" "I do," said Clarice, without turning. "Then you know you can be fired tonight." Clarice dried her hands on the dish towel, turned around, and looked at Bianca in a way that wasn't anger, wasn't fear, wasn't flattery. It was just presence, as if she were truly seeing the girl in front of her, and what she saw did not intimidate her. "I can. But while I'm here, I do things my way. Sandwich or nothing at this hour." There was a silence that lasted about 5 seconds. For Bianca, who was used to seeing people back down in two, it was long enough for something to shift inside her. It wasn't anger. It was something else she didn't know how to name yet. She took the sandwich and left without saying anything. Renato heard about the episode in the morning, when Fernanda told him in a low voice before he left for work. He stood in the middle of the kitchen for a moment, cup in hand, staring at nothing. "She didn't quit," was all he said. "No," Fernanda replied. He left without saying anything else. But that day at the office, in the middle of a meeting about contracts that had nothing to do with it, Renato Cavalcante thought about Clarice, thought about what Fernanda had described, and for the first time in a long while, he also thought about himself and what he had built inside that house besides fortune. No one yet knew what Clarice had noticed in those first days there, what she had observed in Bianca that the others had not seen, or perhaps had not wanted to see. But there was something, a small fracture, almost invisible, behind all that armor. And Clarice knew that kind of fracture very well. She had carried one just like it for years. And she knew, with the clarity of someone who had already been on the other side, that this kind of fracture does not disappear with time. It only deepens if no one has the courage to get close enough to truly see it. In the second week, Clarice changed something in the house routine without asking for permission and without announcing it. It wasn't anything dramatic. She simply stopped leaving food available outside scheduled times. Breakfast was ready until 9, lunch at noon, dinner at 7. Outside of that, the kitchen was hers, and she wasn't there to answer random requests. Bianca found this out on Tuesday when she came downstairs at 10:30 expecting to find hot coffee on the table. The kitchen was clean, organized, and completely empty of any food left out. Clarice was in the backyard hanging clothes. "Where's breakfast?" "It's already been put away." "Lunch is at noon." Bianca stood at the kitchen entrance for a few seconds, waiting for the follow-up that never came. The apology, the offer to remake it, the usual retreat. There was none. She went to her room without eating and stayed furious for a full hour. Then, at 11:50, she came downstairs and sat at the table. Clarice didn't comment. She served lunch on time and treated everything as if it were the normal functioning of the house, because that was exactly what it was becoming. This pattern repeated for days. Bianca resisted, delayed, tested. Clarice didn't punish, didn't lecture, didn't explain the rules more than once. She simply maintained them. And there was something in that silent consistency that began to bother Bianca in a way she didn't know how to handle, because it wasn't the kind of discomfort that could be solved with a shout. One Wednesday afternoon, Bianca did something she didn't usually do. She stood in the hallway watching Clarice work for a few minutes without the other noticing. Clarice folded clothes with an attention that seemed disproportionate to the task. There was no rush, no tension. It was as if she were somewhere else, in an internal silence that the noise of the house couldn't reach. Bianca felt something she didn't immediately recognize. Only later, lying in her room, did she realize what it was. Envy. Not of clothes, not of money, not of anything material. It was envy of that peace, the ability to be in a place and not need to control what was happening around her. Bianca had never felt that. There was always something to fix, someone to push away, some boundary to test. Her natural state was tension, and she had never stopped to realize how exhausting that was. That same week, there was the mirror incident. Bianca had broken a hallway mirror during an argument with her mother, throwing an object that shouldn't have been thrown. The shards were left on the floor. Fernanda asked the heavy cleaning maid to pick them up. Clarice got there first, swept up the pieces carefully, wrapped them in newspaper, and threw them away. But not before leaving. On the console where the mirror had been, a handwritten note in small, firm handwriting. Broken things don't fix themselves. No signature, no addressee. Bianca found the note when she went to get the charger she had left there. She stared at it for a length of time she herself couldn't measure. Then she crumpled it, threw in the bedroom trash, and didn't sleep well that night. What Clarice was doing was not punishment. It wasn't a moral lesson. It was something else that Bianca didn't yet have the vocabulary to name, but that echoed in the corners where she couldn't distract her attention. There was a question beginning to form at the edges of her thoughts, a question she pushed away whenever it appeared, because the answer might be too uncomfortable. Why did the people she pushed away never come back? Not the maids, the others, the classmates who had stopped calling, the childhood friend who had lived on the same street for 6 years and disappeared after a fight Bianca barely remembered, the cousin who came every birthday and stopped on a date she couldn't quite place. She had never connected those dots before, or hadn't wanted to. At that moment, Clarice was sitting in the service area having a coffee she had made for herself, looking out at the garden with that expression that was hard to decipher. If there was a plan, it wasn't written anywhere. It was in every small choice, in every calm refusal, in every silence that lasted exactly the right amount of time. She knew what she was doing. She knew because she had been through something like it. Not like Bianca, but close enough to understand from what point the girl needed to start to find her own path. The question was whether Bianca would get there before destroying something beyond repair. Because there is a limit to what silence can hold, and Clarice knew that moment was near. It wouldn't come with noise. It would come with the precision of someone who knows the terrain and understands exactly where the ground begins to thin. The trigger came on a Friday night, in the most banal way possible. Fernanda had invited 2 friends over for dinner. Something simple, informal, without ceremony. Clarice set the table, made the food, left everything organized with that quiet care that had already become her trademark. Bianca knew about the dinner. She had agreed, the day before, to stay in her room or go out with a group of acquaintances who occasionally came to pick her up. She didn't go out. She came downstairs at 9 at night, in the middle of dinner, with a new piercing in her ear that Fernanda didn't even know had been done, and sat at the table without being invited. She didn't say good evening. She grabbed bread from the basket without asking, responded rudely when one of the guests tried to make conversation, and when the woman made a gentle comment about her hair, Bianca said, with a clarity that cut through the air in the room, "I'm not interested in your opinion." The silence that followed was different from the others. It was the kind of silence that embarrasses, that makes people look down at their plates, so they don't have to see the pain on the face of the person who has just been humiliated in public. Fernanda froze. She didn't say anything. She smiled at her friends with that same smile as always, the one that apologized without words, and changed the subject with a skill that cost her dearly inside. Clarice was in the kitchen. She heard everything. When the guests left and Bianca went upstairs without looking back, Fernanda remained alone at the table with the glasses still half full. Clarice came in to clear the plates and found her employer with her elbows on the table and her eyes shining in a way she was trying to hold back. "I'm sorry," Fernanda said, for no apparent reason. It was the kind of apology that wasn't for Clarice. It was for herself. Clarice didn't respond immediately. She stacked 2 plates, then stopped. "You don't need to apologize for her. You never did." Fernanda raised her eyes. "But I've been doing it for years," she said, and there was a huge confession inside that simple sentence. Clarice nodded slowly, picked up the plates, and went to the kitchen. What happened next was the turning point no one expected, because it came from where no one was looking. Renato Cavalcante arrived home at 10:30 that night, earlier than usual. He found his wife still in the living room, the remains of dinner already cleared away, and listened to the summary of what had happened standing up, without sitting, without taking off his jacket. When Fernanda finished, he stayed quiet for a while, long enough for her to realize that this time it was different. He went upstairs. He knocked on Bianca's bedroom door with 3 firm knocks and opened it without waiting for an answer. Bianca was on her phone, lying down, and looked up with her usual expression, the one that already prepared the ground for the other side to retreat. But Renato didn't retreat. He stood in the doorway and said, in a voice that wasn't anger, it was weight, "I failed you. I was absent when I should have been present, and I let your mother carry what belonged to both of us. That was my mistake. But what you did today to someone who did nothing to you, that has no excuse. And I'm not going to pretend it does anymore." Bianca opened her mouth. "Not now," he said. "Now you go to sleep thinking about what I said." He closed the door. Bianca stared at the closed door for a long time. Not with anger, with something that had never come from her father before. The feeling of having truly been seen, without filter, without the cushion that always appeared before the impact. She thought about the crumpled note in the trash. Broken things don't fix themselves. She thought about the cousin who had stopped coming, the friend from the street, the classmates who no longer called. She thought about the expression on the woman's face at the table when she said she didn't want her opinion. The expression before the forced smile. That exact second when the person had not yet decided how to react. When the face was still honest. Bianca knew that expression. It was the same as the look on Donna Teresa's face before she lowered her head and picked up her bag. She didn't sleep that night. Not for the usual reason. Not because of her usual restlessness. She went to sleep late because she lay in the dark doing something she wasn't used to doing, thinking about others, about how many faces had been left behind with that expression, about how much time had passed without her asking someone how they were and actually waiting for the answer, and about a question that came last, slowly. What would someone say who saw her from the outside, honestly, without fear of being fired? The next morning, Bianca came downstairs at 8:45. Not at 10, not at 11. 8:45, with her hair still damp and an expression that wasn't exactly different, but had something less in it. That tension of someone entering a room already prepared for confrontation had disappeared, at least for that moment. Clarice was in the kitchen. The coffee was still hot. Bianca sat at the table without saying anything. She stared at the cup for a few seconds, and then said, without looking up, "I know you heard last night." Clarice kept cutting fruit. "I did. And what do you think?" It was the first time Bianca had asked someone in the house what they truly thought. Not rhetorically, not as a trap, with a small, fragile openness, the kind that closes quickly if the other person gets the answer wrong. Clarice stopped, placed a knife on the counter, and turned. "I think you already know what you think, and that it's harder than anything I could tell you." Bianca didn't respond. She drank her coffee to the end and left without saying anything else. But that afternoon, she did something that Fernanda only found out about by chance days later. She picked up her phone, found a contact of a classmate she had argued with months earlier over something she herself recognized as small, and sent a message. Not a long explanation, not an elaborate apology. Just 5 words. "I was wrong. I'm really sorry." The classmate took 2 days to reply. When she did, she said she was fine, that she accepted. They didn't immediately become friends again, and maybe they never would. But Bianca kept that response with a care she herself didn't fully understand. The following weeks were slow, irregular, human. Bianca didn't transform overnight. There were still moments of rudeness, still days when the old pattern returned out of inertia. But there was a difference. She began to notice. Not always, not quickly, but she noticed. A tone louder than necessary, a response too short. And sometimes when she noticed, she stopped. That, for those who knew her, was almost impossible to believe. Fernanda noticed first. She didn't say anything for a while, afraid that naming it would break it. Then, one afternoon when the two of them were in the same room reading, Bianca looked at her mother and said, without any apparent context, "You carried a lot on your own because of me." Fernanda lowered her book slowly. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to." They were the most mature words Bianca had said in years. Fernanda didn't cry there. She held it in. She cried later, in the bathroom, with the faucet running, the way mothers cry when the relief is too big to fit in silence. Renato, in his own way, also changed. He started coming home earlier twice a week, without announcing it. He simply showed up, sat at the table, asked how the day had been. It was little. It was a beginning. Clarice had been in the house for 6 weeks when Fernanda called her for a conversation in the living room. Renato was also there, something that hadn't happened since the interview. Clarice sat in the armchair with the same posture as always, not anticipating anything. Renato went straight to the point. "We both want to thank you. What you did here, I don't even know how to properly name it." Clarice waited a moment before answering. "I didn't do anything you couldn't have done. I just didn't leave when it got difficult." "But why didn't you leave?" Fernanda asked, and there was genuine curiosity in the question, not formality. Clarice looked at her with that hard-to-decipher expression that had intrigued Fernanda since the first day. "Because someone did the same for me once. Stayed when I was impossible to handle. And that changed what I believed was possible about myself." It was the first time she had said something about herself. Fernanda didn't ask anything else. Some answers don't need continuation to be complete. Bianca wasn't in that conversation. She was in her room, writing in a notebook she had bought without telling anyone, on a page without a title. The question she still didn't have answers to. It wasn't a diary. It was more like a map, The kind you make when you realize you are lost and decide, finally, to pay attention to the terrain. No maid had lasted a day in that house. Clarice was in her 7th week. If this story touched you in any way, leave in the comments what you felt and which city or country you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel and like the video so that more stories like this reach those who need them.